You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Leviticus 24, Light, Bread, and the Punishment for Blasphemy. At first glance, Leviticus 24 might feel like a collection of disconnected instructions, because it speaks about oil for lamps, bread placed before the Lord, a tragic act of blasphemy, and the principle of justice summarized as eye for eye. But if we read it carefully, you start to notice that a unifying theme begins to emerge. This chapter is about honoring the presence, provision, and name of the Lord. And when we read it in light of Christ, we can't miss how clearly it points us to Him. The chapter opens with a command about keeping the lamps burning continually in the tent of meeting. The Lord tells Moses, "Command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil from beaten olives for the lamp, that a light may be kept burning regularly." We see that in verse 2. Aaron is to arrange the lamps from evening to morning before the Lord regularly. It shall be a statute forever. It says that in verse 3. Now here's something that should stand out to us as we read this passage. The light wasn't occasional, and it wasn't seasonal. It was continual. God's dwelling place among His people was never meant to be dark. That steady flame pointed to the reality of God's ongoing presence. He wasn't a distant deity who checked in occasionally. He was with them. His light shone in the darkness of the wilderness. And when we come to the New Testament, Jesus declares, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." We see that in John 8:12. The lamp in the tabernacle was a shadow. Christ is the substance. The oil-fed flame needed constant tending, but Jesus' light never flickers. In Him, God's presence isn't symbolized by a lamp. It's embodied in a person. Well, the chapter then shifts to the bread of the presence. The Lord commands that 12 loaves be baked and set in 2 piles on the pure table before Him. We read, "Every Sabbath day Aaron shall arrange it before the Lord regularly. It is from the people of Israel as a covenant forever." We see that in verse 8. The bread was to be eaten by Aaron and his sons in a holy place because it was a most holy portion. The 12 loaves represented the 12 tribes. Week after week, the bread sat before the Lord as a visible reminder that the people were continually before Him. They weren't forgotten. They weren't out of sight. But that bread also points our hearts toward Jesus. In John 6:35, He says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." The bread in Leviticus was replaced every Sabbath. It satisfied temporarily and symbolically. Well, Jesus, however, satisfies fully and eternally. He doesn't merely sit before the Father as a symbol of the tribes. He represents us perfectly as our high priest, and He gives Himself as true nourishment for our souls. Now, after these instructions about light and bread, the tone of the chapter changes dramatically. We're introduced to the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian father who gets into a fight and blasphemed the name and cursed. We see that in verse 11. He's brought to Moses, and he's placed in custody until the Lord reveals what should be done. The Lord's response is serious, and it's meant to get the attention of the people of Israel. We read, "Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him." We see that in verse 16. And then the Lord reiterates principles of justice. We read in verse 17 and following, "Whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth." Now, I imagine that some of us might feel uncomfortable reading this because it sounds severe. But please notice that the issue that's at the heart of this passage is the holiness of God's name. In Scripture, God's name represents His character, His reputation, and His revealed identity. So to blaspheme His name wasn't just careless speech. It was open, defiant contempt for the Holy One who dwelled among them. In a camp where God's light burned continually and His bread was set out each week, His name wasn't to be treated lightly. Now, with that in mind, when we look at the life of Jesus, we see something astonishing. Jesus always honored the Father's name. In John 17:6, he says, "I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me." Jesus perfectly revealed the character of God. Where Israel failed and where we fail, Jesus didn't fail. But there's more. Though he never blasphemed, he was accused of it. In Mark 14:64, after declaring his identity before the high priest, the leaders respond, "You have heard his blasphemy." That's what they said. So the sinless Son of God was condemned as a blasphemer. The one who perfectly honored the Father's name, he was executed outside the camp. Coming back to Leviticus 24, that passage says the blasphemer was to be taken outside the camp and stoned. We see that in verse 14. Well, fast forward to Hebrews 13:12, that passage draws a direct line to Christ. There it says, "So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood." So Jesus stepped into the place of the guilty. He bore the penalty that justice demanded. And what about eye for eye? In Leviticus, this principle limited vengeance. It ensured that punishment fit the crime. It was a safeguard against escalating retaliation. But Jesus, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39, he references this very law, and he calls his followers to something deeper. Not the abandonment of justice, but the transformation of the heart. Because at the cross, justice and mercy met. The penalty wasn't ignored. It was absorbed. Leviticus 24 reminds us that God is holy. His presence is radiant. His provision is gracious. His name is weighty, and justice is real. But it also points us to the one who fulfills all of it. Jesus is the true light who never goes out. He's the true bread who never spoils. He's the faithful Son who honors the Father's name without fail. And he's the substitute who suffers outside the camp so we can be brought near. When we read a chapter like this, we're reminded that we don't approach God casually. We come through Christ. And because of him, we don't come in fear of condemnation. We come in reverent gratitude. The lamp still burns. The bread still satisfies. The name is still holy. And in Jesus, we're invited into the light of God's presence forever. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.